Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on our journey through Hilchot Shabbat Be'iyun, and we are in the 9th shiur of the 3rd volume of our Hilchot Shabbat in the pamphlets that we have given out. It's on page 68, and we're going to be trying to cover Siman Shin Yutet, Seif Tetvav and Tetzayin. Today, Seif Tetvav is a very interesting Saif in Hilchot Shabbat that causes some difficulties in the understanding of the general theme that it represents, but in terms of Hilchot Borer, it is not very difficult. The Mishnah says in Masechet Shabbat, Daf Kuf Lametet Amud Bet, that it's permissible, it's mutar, to put a raw egg on a sifter that prior to Shabbat you had put items in it like mustard. You had put mustard on it from before Shabbat, because that on Shabbat you cannot do, because it has pebbles mixed with it, other items, so that would be like Borer 101. That would be, of course, asur. But imagine from before Shabbat you have put, so things have fallen in, and now you're breaking open a raw egg, and this is what they used to do. And raw egg on a sifter, if you pop the yolk actually has a completely different consistency, so it would actually go through the sifter, and the white would stay up. That's what would happen. So, is it mutar to break open a raw egg on a sifter on Shabbat, allowing the yolk to go through and the white staying up? And the purpose that they would do that, you would ask, why in the world would they do that? Is back in the day they would do that in order to give a shinier, nicer, yellower or orangish color to the mustard. That was a part of the process of making a beautiful mustard mix. So is that mutar on Shabbat? Is that not mutar on Shabbat? So we're separating the yolk from the white, and you would say, well, I really don't want the white to get mixed with this, so I'm separating it, so it should be maybe asur, right? Because the part that I don't want stays up, and the part that I want goes through, so it should be separation. That's what we would have thought. Now the Mishnah says it is mutar to do that. There's no problem with that whatsoever. Rashi explains that they would do this in order to filter the dirt out of the mustard. They would do it from before Shabbat, and you put the egg in the same strainer, in the sifter, for the yolk to be filtered through and taking some of the mustard down, the remaining mustard down with it as well, and it's mutar. Now, why is it not borer? Now, the Gemara says later on in Daf Kuf Mem, the Gemara there says it's not borer because the egg is only added in order to enhance the color. So the Gemara says. So it's not like some man-made answer at teretz that we gave or Rishon. It's the Gemara. The Gemara says it's mutar because it's only for color, and Rashi tries to explain that the white does not enhance the colors. You don't want it there, and you only want to color this properly. So therefore, that's not considered borer because both the yolk and the white are considered ochel. They're both considered legitimate food, and hence it's going to be mutar. So Rashi says. Now it's nice words, but still needs explanation, and tremendous amount of time and effort has been spent in the Achronim to explain exactly what the gather of this is. What can we learn from this? What can't we learn from this? And we have here in the in our sources a number of answers, which some of them are easier to understand than others, and you're not really expected to know all these things, because this is just to show the complexity and the beauty of this at the same time, and to give some thought process for people who want to learn this more at length. But in general, going through it very quickly, the Avnei Nezer, the Sachichover Rebbe, in his Iglei Tal, he explains that the yolk will be eaten, and as far as the food is concerned, there's no difference between the yolk and the white, and therefore, because there's no difference as far as food, and borer is a halakha that we deal with foods in this manner, it will be mutar. It's not borer. Now, if the yolk would be only used for coloring and not eating, it would be subject to regular laws of borer. If the yolk would be only a coloring agent, but not food at the same time as being a coloring agent, that would be asur, says the Iglei Tal. Right? So now that you have two things, it's food that you're separating from another food. So it's not really psolet. And really you don't care about the food item of the psolet. You only want the coloring. So therefore it's mutar. Now you could ask a bunch of questions on the Avnei Nezer, but without getting into too many details, you'll see that the next comments really complement this as well. The Bach, for instance, writes that the egg yolk and the white are both considered two different types of food, and when separating the food for eating purposes, then it involves borer. If you have two types of food, like in salad, and you choose one and you don't want the other one, that would be borer. But when you're separating two foods, none of them is a psolet, and your preference of which one of the foods is not food related, it's color related, says the Bach, that's not borer. Right? You see, it's very nuanced. And to be completely honest, they're chidushim, they're novelties in halakha of not exactly splitting hair, but they are concepts in Hilchot Borer that are novelties in understanding. The Magen Avraham writes that the egg yolk and the white, they are one entity. This is also a big chidush, but it's the most simple to understand. Says the Magen Avraham, they're an egg. An egg is one unit. Now it happens to have two different parts in it, but really it's an egg. It's one unit together. The yolk and the white are considered one, and therefore, because it is the same entity, look at the third thing that you have over here. Says the Magen Avraham, they're considered one thing, one entity, and if not for the fact that the white is mixed with the refuse, with the trash, the psolet of the mustard, it would be really mutar to separate them, even for eating purposes. You understand? That means you could take a spoon or a kli and take the yolk out if you want to. You'll see the Mishnah Berurah, for instance, the Chafetz Chaim talks about a parf creamer for coffee that they used to use in his time. You know what they used to use? They would take the egg yolk and batter it until it puffed up as a white thing, and they would put that in the coffee as a coffee creamer. Right? So, says the Chafetz Chaim, is it mutar to do that on Shabbat? So he brings this machloket without really spending a lot of time on it, and he says, well, according to Magen Avraham, it will be mutar really because there's no borer over here. But because there are others who disagree with this, that they are considered two different types of food, as the Bach said right now, and the Iglei Tal also understands it like that. So says, be mahmir, don't try to not do that with a kli. But you could do it with your hand, right? You could take the yolk with your hand out, try not to pop it, and put it in a kli. Or even when you break I think that's what you want to say, that if you break the egg and you have the two halves of the shell and you kind of like pour the white out in one and separate it, that's also not bekli. That's also considered beyad, and that's also mutar. So says the Chafetz Chaim, do it that way, not with a kli, and you will be good to go, right? So But the Magen Avraham that says these are one entity together, it will create this big chidush. They could even do it with the kli. You could even separate it for later on during the day. Doesn't have to be even miyad. Doesn't have to be biyad. Doesn't have to be miyad. It's one thing, right? It's like you're putting half of your rice in this bowl, half of your rice in that bowl. That's not borer. That's one entity. Here also is one entity. But what you gain from having one entity, says the Magen Avraham, is the only reason that you don't want the white over here is because it's mixed with the refuse, with the psolet. So therefore, you leave it. But borer, man dachar shemeh, it's not borer at all, right? Of course, this will tie back to Sif Tet that we had, legabe pouring water on shmarim, on wine sediment, that the Shulchan Aruch says that's mutar. Because going through sifter, when you put it, it's all ochel. It comes down, is also ochel. The fact that in the middle it gets mixed with the shmarim, we kind of like X that stage out, and it's mutar, which also ties into using pour-overs and coffee on Shabbat and so on and so forth. Whether or not it's mutar, which according to many poskim would be mutar because of this whole thing, and so on. What does the Mishnah say at the end of the day? We have this at least three ways of understanding this Sa'if and how it ties in Hilchot Borer all together. And the Chafetz Chaim, who does not explain this, he doesn't even ask this question. He just goes right into the halakha, explaining it without asking any questions. He says that since they are not being separated as food, and this is again earlier on in Biur Halakha and Sif Gimel, Diura Matchil Hayu Lefanav. So he kind of like goes off tangent over there in Sif Gimel, and he explains that because they're not separated as food items, neither item is improved by the separation. It's not that they're completely separate. They're not improved by you separating them, and therefore it's mutar. And says you could take a look at the parenthesis over here, which is he spells out the chidush, the novelty of this Chafetz Chaim, that because of this, you would perhaps think that something that has a specific use and is now used for something else, that is not considered borer at all. In other words, because this is food and now it's not used for food, it's used for coloring, that would not be borer, which is a tremendous chidush as well. Now, we spoke already before about this Sephardi poskim when it comes to using a strainer for the sink. You don't want it to be clogged, and we mentioned that the Achronim paskin, the same thing that we got to discuss over here. The similarity here is minute, but we mentioned that the concept of borer ochel mitoch psolet or psolet mitoch ochel is not extended to a scenario of psolet mitoch psolet. Right? If everything is psolet, I just don't want my sink to be clogged. Is that borer? No, it's not. Right? So here is a little similarity. That's why it's put here, but really it belongs earlier on, and that's why we discussed it a little bit earlier in previous shiurim reference there. But the similarity over here is just like here, both of them are ochel, and we're saying that for a separate, when you have a separate thing in mind, to separate ochel from ochel is not borer. If it would be both psolet, also would be the same. When you have a separate reason, not because of the separation, not because you really care. If your piping could handle all the solid trash that's going down, then you wouldn't even put a strainer. You just let everything go down because everything is trash anyways. You have a side reason because you don't want to clog your piping. That's why you separate them. It will be mutar. But really, in reality, many of the poskim say even further than this. Chidush over here that psolet mitoch psolet is not considered borer. That's not considered part and parcel of the halachot of separation. It's not what you want from what you don't want. It's from what you don't want, and what you don't want, you just want to separate them properly, and that's not considered a a Isur of Borer. Now, so the Bach holds that the yolk and the white are two different items, right? Magen Avraham disagrees with that. Magen Avraham says that they are considered one item, right? So the nafka mina is, as we mentioned, that if you want to, according to Magen Avraham, separate your yolk from Shabbat morning to Shabbat afternoon, it's mutar, no problem. You want to make a batter of egg yolk as coffee creamer, that will be no problem, right? According to Bach, Hashem Yirahem, you'll be going to a very warm place if you do that, because that's mamash borer, right? So you see, there's a massive nafkamina in how you look at an egg as one entity or as two different types of food mixed with each other in one creation. That makes all the difference. So the Mishnah.
Quick clarification, Rav. The Magen Avraham holds that it's not, it's one entity because they grew together, the egg yolk and the white. Is that the thinking? These things grew together, so therefore it's one entity. Is that thinking?
That is perhaps, he doesn't say why, but yeah, that perhaps is the reason, yes. So, we had this before. Yes, right. We had this before when something was grown together. We spoke about chicken like that, like different parts of the meat. Of course, we also discussed the fact that many poskim and the Rabbi Shaul, Obadia, considering this as a very serious thing, more so Rabbi Zion, that things that are not gidule karka is not doraita altogether. So you to begin with discussing the Rabbanan over here, and you could combine this also with that, and so on. So the Mishnah Berurah just brings this machloket Bach and Magen Avraham, and he says, don't do it. Don't do it. And he says it's preferable to be stringent because it's a severe isur, so he does not really deal with the fact that this perhaps is the Rabbanan at best, but the Maaseh Chafetz Chaim is very stringent when it comes to this isur. Okay?
So according to Bach, if you took both parts of the egg and you decide to eat both, but you want to eat both in a different way, it would be asur? Like if you want to whip the...
Well, do you want the white to be mixed?
No,
or do you want to separate?
Eat it separate.
Right now, when you want to mix the yolk with the mustard, do you want the white there? No.
Of course not. Not for the
So there is your potential problem. Now, the Bach explains why that's mutar, because the Mishnah says it's mutar, and the Gemara explains why it's mutar. But the reasoning would make all the difference in the Bach and the Magen Avraham, because according to Magen Avraham, there's nothing to talk about. It says one item. The only problem is that you don't want it is because it's mixed with the refuse of the mustard, right? But you could really take a kli and separate yolk and the white from each other, according to Magen Avraham. According to Bach, that absolutely is not mutar. Here, there's a different reason why it's mutar, because you don't really care about the thing. It's two different foods, and the reason that you're separating them is a separate reason, not food related, but color related. And there, the Bach holds that's already not considered borer, right? Which is, again, some of these svarot are need a little more explanation for a more in-depth learning of what exactly is the difference between the igletal and the Bach over here. That there are subtleties involved, but again, I don't want to make it overly complicated more than it's necessary for the purpose of this year.
So the Bach would hold that like big pits of a fruit are also separate. Like if you have like a plum or the pit and the fruit, two separate things.
So we spoke about the pits and the fruits beforehand. You remember we spoke about the ones that have only one pit versus those who have multiple pits, and I want to just refer you to that year. So that is basically Seif Tetvav, okay, without complicating it further. And Seif Tet Zayin is what we're going to focus a little bit more on today, which is wormy waters, right? You have worms in the water. Is it mutar or is it asur to sift them as you drink them? Now, for just complete transparency, this really should go together with, this is Orach Chaim Siman Shin Yutet, Seif Tet Zayin, but this should really go together with the halachot of Tolaim, because as we alluded to this earlier on in our study of sifters and especially New York water and the strainers of or the sifters of your sink, your tap water, not every creature in the water is asur necessarily. The Shulchan Aruch, this should really go with Shulchan Aruch in Yoredas Iman Pei Dalet Sif Aleph. The very beginning of Hilchot Tolaim, and Hilchot Tolaim are very important. Perhaps maybe this week or the next we'll have a shiur with one of my friends coming from East Coast about all of the kashrut related items of Pesach as we approach Pesach, and specifically talking about Tolaim and Seder night. But we're very careful in Hilchot Kashrut, but Tolaim and treif food, it's called like that. Treif food has a very simple and subtle way of creeping into our kosher kitchens, and that is the concept of Tolaim. The Pri Chadash, Rabbi Chizkiah de Silva, he writes in his preface to Hilchot Tolaim there, he says the reason, it's very interesting, he says the reason that people have so much bad midot is because they're consuming non-kosher food, which changes a person's midot, and his nefesh becomes tameh. And he says that's because of Tolaim, because people are not careful in Hilchot Tolaim as much as they should be, right? And now you have it. Yeah, you have it. If you didn't know, you have every wild salmon may most probably contain worms inside the flesh, right? And some of the water, some of the other fruits you could have even a very simple orange that you have in your kitchen, and you could take a look at them, and if you see brown circles on the peel of your orange, they are probably worms underneath that. That's a wax that is created by the worm to protect itself. It's like a cocoon on top of the thing. Is that mutar? Is that asur? Well, orange juice, company-made orange juice has those things because the way they're battered and washed together and thrown there. Is that really, we have to sift our orange juice? Not, yes. Becomes a whole question, right? And the Shulchan Aruch there says that Tolaim that were created in water, right? And they never creeped out and back in, they're mutar to drink. Even if you know that there are worms inside the water, those who were created in water and they never got out in any shape or form, they're considered part of the water, you could have them, right? Now, says the Kaf HaChaim here in our Siman, that if you're disgusted by it, right? Anyone would not be disgusted by it? Anyone? And don't be embarrassed. Anyone here? There's Ari and Ari. In OU, there are two Aris, doctors and whatever. They're laymen, but tremendous people. They are very interesting individuals. And they work really hard to go around the globe, find Jewish communities that they have interesting food, halacha-related food items, and they work on it halachically and present it. For instance, one would be, can one community use the mesoret of a different community? Right? For instance, this actually soft matzah. Anyone has had soft matzah over here? Right? Anyone hasn't had it?
Fantastic.
A lot of people who have not had it or not had it, it's like they're afraid to say anything, right? So they're actually very yummy. If you want to have it on a regular Tuesday, they're really good. You have to know how to eat them, right? You have to unfreeze them and put them between a plata and a pot, and it'll be like mamash out of the tanur. It's easier digested, easier eaten, and some people love them. And some people don't love them. Some people don't love them because they just don't love them. Some people don't love them because they're afraid, because it looks like lafa, basically. And
you should have a lot less to...
yeah, of course. It's much easier to be machmir for instance, like the Magen Avram. My mother, she live and be well, told me that her father's and grandfather's minhag, they were from Yazd, and they were very machmir. I told her, this is the Magen Avram, and many poskim pass like that. She's like, really? They would put a kezayit of matzah in their mouth on the night of Pesach. That's a mitzvah to eat, and they would chew it until it was soft and completely mushed, and they would swallow the entire kazait at once, right?
Why?
Because that's a shita Magen Avraham. Ask me around Pesach time, or eating a mitzvah deoraita of eating a kazait of matzah at night, but it's much easier to do it with the soft matzah than the crackers. Anyhow, in any case, can you use as an Ashkenazi person? Okay, by the way, it's muchach in the Ramah that their matzah was a massive matzah and it was at least this thick. Muchach, and there's no two ways around it. But the minhag, it's clear. It's provable, right? And it's clear. So it is. It's pretty cool. But the minhag for past few hundreds of years has been to have this rukikin, this thin, crackery matzahs, right? Which raises a lot of questions by itself. Is the mizurah, is the mizurah, is the hamotzi? Did they have that? Did they not have that? You could talk on this from now until no end, right? But can they use it? Can the Ashkenazim use the Sfardische soft matzah? Or can you go to Teman and have a nice dish of shish kebabbed grasshoppers? Right, so Ari and Ari actually researched this. There's a whole thing about it. The Shach, and it's a real literature that you are actually indeed allowed to use the proper masoret of a different community. This, by the way, becomes a question for Turkey as well. You know that many Ashkenazim do not eat turkey because there's no masoret on turkey, right? Without getting, it's not a Hilchot Kashrut shiur, but they brought, they had like chocolate-covered grasshoppers in the OU official Masorah dinner, right? I saw the pictures of it. Some famous person at the time, it was famous, he was actually munching on them, and I was like, I would never be able to eat that. And the Shach actually writes, it says, if you're disgusted with it, then you will be over on the Isra Bal Shaksu, so it will be asur to drink them, not because of kashrut problems, but because of Bal Shaksu problem. If you're disgusted with something, right, even though that halachically is glak kosher, it will be still asur to consume them. Yes, so that I'm not going to ask anyone to munch on chocolate-covered grasshopper, but the thing would be, if you study the New York water, Rabbi Heinemann Shlita, he keeps, at the time when I was learning with him, he kept at home, he showed it to me, like a little small bottle of water filled from New York tap water, and he gave it to me to examine. I was looking in the light, and there's all these white creatures in it that you can see with your naked eye. And I remember, I don't know if it's the same still or not. I remember I told myself, I would be disgusted to drink this water. Now that I know what goes on in the water, it would be pretty despicable to drink it as a regular thing, even if it is mutar to drink. So you mentioned before that New York water is a very highly debated subject, whether or not it falls under what the Shulchan Aruch says in Hilchot Tolaim, Siman Pedalet Seif Aleph, or maybe not, right? That's very, very much questionable. But at the same time, if you are disgusted with it, says the Kaf HaChaim, it would be asur to sift it because of borer. Because for you it's not drinkable. And for the majority of people it would be like that, maybe, says the Kaf HaChaim. And therefore, it will become all of a sudden Hilchot borer related because of Hilchot Tolaim, right? Of course, if you consider that asur, then for sure it will be asur regardless of if you are disgusted with it or not. So, hence the warmy waters. So, the Rosh was asked this question, whether or not it's permissible to drink warmy water on Shabbat by placing a little sifter cloth on top of your cup. In other words, you pour the water inside your cup, you put a shmate on the cup, right? Tightening it and holding it with your hand, and now you drink the cup, the water sifting through this cloth, coming to your mouth, holding back all the creatures behind, right? Is that mutar or asur? This is what he was asked. And he said that a big chidush in Chot Borer, which is very much needed and important. Says the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, Melechet Borer is when you do prior to eating. You remember we spoke about this a lot, right? What is considered as you eat? But this is mamash as you eat, right? As you drink. Says Rabbeinu Asher, this is drinking. This is not Borer, and therefore it's mutar. When you do it as you are eating. So therefore, if you go next time to New York and you're stuck with this problem, you get an Airbnb and you're there for business, right? Can you do that? Well, yeah, given that it actually is fine enough to sift through it, but not too fast. Not too fast, right? Now, the Bet Yosef says that the case that we're dealing with is a situation that the water is completely drinkable without the worms, and only because of the worms inside the water, it becomes an issue, and therefore it's not a problem of filtering water. The water we mentioned before in Sif Yud, that if the water is completely drinkable, and of course you want it to stay clean, then there's the Isur of Melaben. A potential second Isur would be Isur of Sochet. Because if you drench something in water, then you can't handle it. You're very concerned that you're going to come to squeeze it out, and that will be potentially a second problem. Now, why isn't it a problem here? Because Maran, I'll read to you the language of Maran over here, right? For just a moment. Maran writes in Seif Tet Zayin, Ma'im shesh b'hem tolaim. If you have water that's got tolaim inside, worms inside, mutar lishtotal al yedei mapa b'Shabbat. You could drink them through a mapa, through a cloth on Shabbat. D'lo shayach borer shamir, because it's not considered borer. He brings the Rosh as in his tshuvot as a halacha. Ela b'mtaken ha'inyan kodem achila o shtiya. Borer is when you fix the food for before you come to drink or eat them, but at the same time, aval im b'shat shtiya ma'akevet ha'psolet, if as you drink you hold back the psolet, that is fine. Ein ze me'en melacha. This is not the description of melechet borer, and therefore is mutar. That's what Mechaber Maran says here. So what are you doing? You're and he is coming to quote the Rosh that talks about putting a cloth on top of the cup and drinking it, right? So the Rosh talks about. Maran allows this. What's the big problem? For those who remember, earlier on in Seif Yud, what did Maran say? Let's read it together one more time, or for those who just joined. Yain o mayim shem slulim mutar lesaranam b'meshameret. You could put water into a meshameret, but you can't really put water inside aval besudar mayim asur. But if you have a cloth, you can't put water inside of it. Why? Mishum libun, because you are washing it. So Maran holds Sheriato zu libun. I'm just telling you in terminology that's used for the halachot of washing and laundering. Sheriato zu libun. That if you wet it, if you drench it, if you soak it, that is already washing. You don't have to go and scrub it to be considered washing. You pour water on a cloth, that's asur mishum libun. And that's what Maran paskins. And it's not just over here. She'er Knesset HaGdolah, Reb Chaim ben Yisrael ben Beneshti, Harav Shalom, he asks this question, this stira. I say, wait a second, I haven't forgotten Seif Yud when I'm learning Seif Tet Zayin. Most of you may have, but Knesset HaGdolah didn't forget it. And he says, not only I didn't forget that, you have to understand that in Shin Bet, which we haven't learned together, in Siman Shin Bet, Seif Tet and Seif Yud, Maran says this clearly also, that's Asur. Later on in Siman Shin Lamed Dalet, Maran is talking about a fire, right? You have a fire. If you have a fire, actually, by the way, we had a fire over here, if you remember, when someone had put fatty meat inside the oven over Shabbat, right? You remember that? We lost our oven because of it, and some Yeshiva Bachurim were here at the time. It was the middle of the night, so they had put cups of water around it, right? So I guess that's because they had learned the Shulchan Aruch. I'm not discussing whether that's the right thing or wrong thing. The Shulchan Aruch says if a talit got on fire, like the corner of a talit got on fire, can I pour water on the rest of the talit? that the fire gets there and it goes off, mutar or asur. So Maran says that, it's a problem of libun, right? It's a problem because of limud. That's the. I'm not sure if we have it here quickly. If I could quickly take a look. I should have prepared this before. It's Shin Lamed Dalet. I think it's Sif Chavdalet. Maybe it is.
Ignoring the other issues of going.
Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. Yes, here. Yesh omrim she'en yachol liten alav mashkin kedei sheyichbe כשיגיע להם. There are those who say that you can't do that. ויש אומרים שמותר לעשות כן בשאר משקים חוץ מן המים. There are those who say, well, you could do other mashkim, colorful ones, but not water because it's libun, because shiriyatu zur libuno. And says, mishum kibus, he says, v'yesh matirin, the third shita is, yesh matirim afilu b'mayim, that even water is mutar. And says Maran, black and white, v'divrei svara shenit nir'im. Halacha is like the second shita, which is, you could do other mashkim, but not water. So Maran holds that pouring water on something is asr. So how in the world is this mutar then? Right? You with me so far? So there are many answers given over here. To me, the simplest answer would be that this cloth may be a cloth that you have dedicated for shmata. Maran doesn't say anything otherwise. He just brings the Tshuvot HaRosh. He doesn't even talk about the real thing that you're using to stop it. Right? So you could easily say that the way he understood the Rosh, of course, is getting around the halachot of mashkin that you put on the cloth by having a shmata that's miyuchad for this, and you don't care about its cleanliness, and hence it will be mutar. Right? Now, Reb Chaim Mamaneshkin himself does not answer this. He says, well, Maran is bringing Teshuvot HaRosh over here, but he doesn't really mean it. He really is machmir, but here he just brought the Teshuvot HaRosh because he wants to paskin Hilchot Borer like the Rosh. That's what the Knesset Gdolah writes himself. The Mamar Mordechai, he very vehemently disagrees with the Knesset Gdolah. He says, well, how can he say that he paskins something that's asur as mutar because he wants to quote the language of the Rosh? You can't. That's not sayable, right? He does not agree with that. So he says the answer that I like the most. He says this is a mapa, says Ma'amar Mordechai, that is miyuchad for this. It's a shmata that is designated for these types of things. You don't really care if it's clean or it's not. So therefore it's mutar, even according to Maran himself, right? Whereas your talit, you care about, right? In Siman Shin Bet, we're talking about kibbutz. All those things are, a regular shirt that I have, can I put some water on it when my kid spits on it on Shabbat? No, because I care about its cleanliness, right? But anything that I don't care about, that would be mutar in that case, right? Now, they bring another teretz. I'll mention it here in the name of Shelot Utshuvot Darkei Noam, that in a garment that there's no dirtiness in it, it's completely clean. Completely clean. There's no libun. If it's fully clean, me putting some water on it, that's libun. That's not libun. It's clean. I literally just washed it and got out of dry cleaners, right? It's clean. So what mal libun shayach? Like, was not what libun? But says Darkei Noam, the reason that it says it's asur in Shin Lamed Dalet that we just mentioned, it's because also the one that we mentioned before, meaning his answer really answers both of them. He says because of schita, right? Because when you drench something with water, it's asur because of schita, right? even though the Maran writes there, Mishum Kibus, it says it clearly, and it doesn't seem to fit with this Darchenoam 100%, but he could squeeze out of it, pun intended, that it really, squeezing also is part of Libun, because that's, without getting too much in Siman Shin Bet over here, but that's also considered Libun. So he says, the problem is Chita. In other words, for instance, if you have a rain, we had a lot of rains in past month, and people actually had this question. They were drying something, a towel or whatnot. Kids go and outside on the porch or in the backyard, and started raining, and they wanted to take them in. Can you take something that's now drenched and handle it? The halakha is no, it's asur, because it will be isur of schita, right? Even though that's an offshoot of kibisa by itself, but it would be asur. So it says Darchenoam, the isur is because of kvisa, because of schita rather, right? And here, because it's a small place, Maran Bet Yosef himself directly writes that if you wet a small area of a beged, there's no chashash of schita. So therefore, if I have a large thing and I'm pouring water on it, that's a problem. Siman Shin Bet, Siman Shin Lamed Dalet. That's the problem there. But over here, what am I doing already? I have a little cup. I put this, I sip from it. A little 2-inch on 1 inch is going to get wet. You know, it's a clean cloth, so there's no libun. And you're going to tell me schita? There's no schita. It's like a little piece of the things. That's how he answers it. Now, it may not become very relevant for this, but extremely relevant for other areas of our life on Shabbat, knowing these basic rules and regulations for this. Okay, so we're just going to read a little bit of I have 2 minutes before allowing for questions. I'm just going to read a little piece over here in Mishnah Berurah. Alidei Mapa, take a look at your Mishnah Berurahs. Umishum melaben leka. It's not the isur of melaben, of washing on Shabbat, says the Chafetz Chaim. Why? Because the leka lichluch, there's no dirtiness. So you see, Mishnah Berurah right away, Paskins, now that we know the background, you know what he's doing. Even though that he writes just 3 words there and done, now you understand what he's trying to say. He's trying to say that when you have something very clean, there's no isur of libun, which is like this, Darchenoam, right? Uchmosh katav b'tzman shin betziftet. Ve'im ken ledat ha'osrin sham, but says the Chafetz Chaim, wait a second, there are those over there in Seiftet that they say even if it's clean, it's going to be asur. So then what do you do with that, right? Asur al yedei mapa, then it will be asur to do it with a cloth, v'hainu dafka b'mayim, and that's only with water, because water does not dirty the cloth, cleans it, doesn't make it dirty. But with colorful drinks like wine, like juice, and so on, it will be mutar according to everybody. The ein mapa mitlaben ali shriatan, because it does not become clean through their making them wet. Okay. But again, what Chafetz Chaim does not say yet, Eliyahu writes that even with water you could be mekel afilu dat haosrim, even according to those who are stringent in Siman Shin Bet Sif Tet, ובמקום התחק יש להקל כיוון שאינו מתכוון לכביסה. Says push comes to shove in extenuating circumstances you could be mekel even with water. Now, he does not bring the teretz of the Mamar Mordechai, which is probably the most straightforward. That if you have, push comes to shove, try to use something that you don't care about the cleanliness of it. Use a shmata. Use a clean shmata that you could put on your mouth or whatnot. And that will be mutar because you're not going to care about. Again, this becomes very much nogea. If you have a little towel and you want to wet it with your hand and wipe something, so it's not really, you're wetting a little area, which is not really isur schita, but you will have a isur if you put some water on the towel, maybe you say that should be kibus because of this. But if it's a shmate, again, they don't care about it, so they don't have that isur, they don't have this isur, and it will be mutar. So I'm just giving you one out of hundreds of examples that you can apply this in daily life. Every Shabbat, these things come up, especially with families have a lot of spills and a lot of kids. And Baruch Hashem, the bracha, like the Gemara says in Moed Katan, the bracha of a household is really when everything's broken and upside down and dirty, because Baruch Hashem, kids are running around. So this becomes much more relevant in that way. So that was an important piece of the Mishnah Berurah to read. I have more to say on the small Biur Halacha on the top of Kuf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. The first Biur Halacha is Siftet Zayin, but I'm just going to open it for questions, and then maybe we'll discuss the Chazon Ish and the Or Letzion in a different time. Go for it.
Yeah, a couple. So first would be if your shoes are soaking wet from the rain, and every step you take, you're doing skita. What do you do in that situation? You wouldn't take your shoes off when you're walking home.
Well, first of all, that's not necessarily, we're not studying Hilchot Sechita right now, so I'm going to leave that for when we actually get into it. The short answer is that it's not a problem, but for reasons beyond the scope of this talk right now.
Fine. Okay. Regarding going into a pool for like a cold dip or something, so it's an issue of libun and it's an issue of Sechita, you're saying? Those are the two main issues?
Well, but you're saying for hair.
For the swimsuit, let's say. The swimsuit itself.
The swimsuit is not necessarily libun because, again, it's made for this, but taking it off becomes a question. Taking it off becomes a question because, again, these are areas that we're not discussing right now. But if something is made to be wetted like that and it's already clean, it's not that you're trying to be smart and clean it off by a little dip. It's really clean. That would not be considered necessarily skita because it's made for that. It's made for that, and that's correct as well. You don't want chlorine in your or salt in your garments. But again, I'd much rather not discuss and answer any of the off topics, and please do not ask off topic. Yes. Because it takes time from other people who actually have a question on this.
Should I ask?
Yeah.
In regards to the egg question, like we said earlier, that Chacham Bada says you can peel a cucumber, right? I know it was also a debated topic, but if the Mishnah Berurah is over here has concern over separating the egg from the yolk, wouldn't apply the same thing to a cucumber?
Yeah, he would not necessarily be makel by cucumbers with a peeler either. Like there, we of course discussed that there's more than one reason for why it is. That is perhaps a combination of different reasons. But yeah, it does not mean that Mishnah Berurah would be makel there. Correct.
Is there a difference between the egg and the cucumber?